So we have sound, yes. So thank you for coming to this event with 4 bright minds. I shall not measure myself in terms of brightness, but as you know, the subject is democratic capitalism, still a model to follow. And there are 3 basic questions. Which one is, number 1 is, how true is it to directly link democracy with free market capitalism? Number 2 is the Chinese model serving as an inspiration path for countries elsewhere in the world. And the third one, how many different models for economic transition do we see in the world and where? But we first have a keynote speaker, a very fine gentleman sitting to my right. And when I looked into his biography and his CV, I stopped counting the books he has been written, and I thought it would be something like 30 books, but he just told me here, as a little trade secret, it might even be 50 books. So even for him to have some time to be here today is I would say, quite an achievement. Mr. Michael Novak, just to say a few words about Michael Novak, is a distinguished visiting professor at Maria University in Naples, Florida. He's a former Chao-shiuan scholar in religion, philosophy, and public policy in the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. He's an MA graduate in the history and philosophy of religion from Harvard University and the author of numerous books on the philosophy and theology of culture with a focus on the essential elements of a free society. Also, Mr. Novak has received many international awards, including the $1 Million Temple Prize for Progress in Religion. And but his CV, if you go to the internet, you should take a break for about half an hour or maybe more, and then you will be totally introduced to this fine man. And Michael will be the keynote speaker, so please, Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be back in this beautiful city, and beautiful also in terms of the spiritual leadership that is given us through Václav Havel and many others. I have to say, writing the books I do is not so hard. I am Slovak. I'm Middle Europe. I just work steady every day. They pile up if you do that. But anyway, we've been asked a number of questions, and I'm just going to answer them telegraphically. I wrote a little paper, but it's too long, and I cut it very badly. For all its faults and limitations, one of the most attractive features of democratic capitalism is this. It embraces many different kinds of capitalism and many different kinds of democracy. It is obvious that France is not the United States. Even Tocqueville recognized that in 1835. Sweden is not Italy. The United Kingdom is not South Korea. Japan is not Singapore, etc. They are all distinctive, each distinctive. One facet of democratic capitalism is a principle formulated by the great sociologist Peter Berger in his book, The Capitalist Revolution, 50 Propositions About Prosperity, Equality, and Liberty, 1986. Empirical observation clearly showed at that time that capitalism was a necessary but not sufficient condition for the success of democracy. Berger recognized many examples of new capitalist economies beginning to raise up their own poor, which could not then be called democratic. They were capitalist, but not democratic. Chile under Pinochet was one. In the Philippines, Singapore, Spain, and several significant others on 2 or 3 different continents also became capitalist before becoming democratic. Nearly a dozen nations turned capitalist, especially India and China, to pull themselves out of the worst forms of poverty. But some of these nations were not democratic by any means. The pattern seemed to be capitalism first, and after a time, democracy. Further observation led me to the following modifier. In the long run, democracy is a necessary condition for the success of capitalism. 2 arguments lead to this modification. First, under various forms of dictatorship or authoritarianism, economic decisions have often been reached without taking account of vital constituencies such as small business or various sectors of manufacturing or companies that depend on technologies that have necessary links to overseas partners. The second argument is that even successful capitalist nations such as Singapore have been plagued by problems of succession. It's one of the advantages of democracy, poor as it is, limping as it is that it does provide for legitimate succession. And for investors who need stability to risk their investments, this turns out to be a great economic advantage as well. A second question this panel has been asked to meet is whether China now serves as a better model for some aspiring nations than democratic capitalism does. Surely that's true, but the question's an empirical one. It is to be settled by observable evidence. Chinese leadership today is betting on the possibility of sustaining economic liberty without political liberty. I judge that this project cannot, in the long run, be successful. Once there are a sufficient number of successful entrepreneurs, they will see that in important respects, they are smarter and have a larger horizon than the party apparatchiks. They will resent the errors made by the commissars. They will demand their own representation in national decisions. That is, they will demand representative government with checks and balances. I may be wrong about this. I accept empirical evidence as decisive. It's a question that will be decided in due time. In brief, the history of the 20th century seems to me to have been played out in 3 acts. Actually, the 3rd act is only now beginning, and it belongs to the younger generation to play the leading parts. The 1st act settled the question whether democracy or dictatorship better protects the human rights of individuals and of whole peoples. The 2nd act settled the question whether socialism or capitalism is better for the liberation of the poor from poverty. As a almost contemporary instance, India and China between them, beginning about 1980, have raised well over 500 million persons out of poverty, the fastest and largest movement out of poverty in human history. The 3rd act in which we are now engaged must answer this question: which are the most favorable moral and cultural practices for the preservation of all 3 systems: economic liberty, political liberty, and moral and cultural liberty? For all three are essential to democratic capitalism, and I think to the human being. Which systems are successful in inculcating the virtues necessary for the survival and prospering of free societies? The fundamental question, then, is the moral question. What's the most practical moral ecology for the survival and prospering of free societies? Physical ecology, we've learned, is vitally important. But more important is moral ecology. We have been so busy for 100 years with the political and economic questions that we have neglected the third, deepest, most fundamental, and most vital sector. Is democratic capitalism still a model to follow? More than half the nations of the world are still trying, but the task is very demanding morally. The particular habits of the dynamic economy are enterprise, invention, discovery, intelligent organization, and hard intellectual and physical work. Those are all moral qualities. The institutions that nourish such virtues include the rule of law, private corporations, especially small ones, which create most of the jobs in the economy. In the United States, I think it's something like 80%. Open and competitive markets, rights of association, rights to the cheap and easy legal incorporation of businesses. That's a right. It's not a favor done to you by the state. You have a right to form these associations. And it should be done cheaply and easily. Government simply records them. It doesn't create them. And tax codes favorable to the good habits that bear practical fruit. These crucial points explain the reason why the dynamic economy that raises up the poor is called capitalism. Why? That word derives from the Latin caput, head, the old head, the seat of ideas and invention and discovery. Remember in the Sistine Chapel, the Lord God, the Creator, comes down, points to Adam's finger. Images, Creator makes image of Creator. But in the back of the Creator's head is a purple-violet cloud. It's in the shape of the human brain, the source of creativity among humans. And to say we are made in the image of God is to say we have a duty to create and to make something of the world which God has given us. What is crucial about capitalism, I want to say, is the virtues it inculcates and demands. What is crucial about democracy is the virtues it demands: self-restraint, respect for others, peaceful cooperation, compromise in its true sense. Not when you compromise your moral principles, but you recognize that when you're dealing with others, everybody must win a little and everybody must lose a little. So you find a way to keep making progress, although nobody gets everything that they want. To sum up, the third act of the history of democratic capitalism is the moral question. Granted that a people has gained economic liberty from poverty and political liberty from tyranny, what is the moral ecology necessary for their survival as a free people? Their future improvement, their prospering. I mean, I can tell you as a citizen of the United States, I worry greatly on this score, whether or not we are losing the internal habits and the moral environment which shall keep our institutions prosperous. There's some reasons for pessimism in that regard, and some reasons for optimism. A corrupt, lazy, dishonest, and decadent people cannot preserve human liberty. It will breed a nation of serfs and slaves who do not want to carry the responsibilities of free persons, but want to have leaders to take care of their needs. Leave the driving to us. In sum, democratic capitalism is an exceedingly difficult model to live up to. Its costs in moral effort and moral training are formidable. That all nations fail at these preconditions in some respects is to be expected. Free societies are made from poor clay, such as we. But they must cultivate sufficient virtue among their people to survive and to move ahead. They don't have to be built on saints. There aren't enough saints to fill a republic. Free republics have to be built on sinners, like all of us. But there has to be enough virtue to put us over, make some progress, politically, economically, and also morally. As to the question of how many different models for economic transition there now are in the world, I note that compared with the years 1900, 1948, 1980, we have today a far vaster field of empirical examples to consider. If I recall my figures correctly, in 1900 there were not yet 6 democracies. In 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed by only 48 nations. In 1990, the whole worldwide ice pack that held together the socialist nations was dissolving into dozens of transitional societies. It is indeed a good time to take a new inventory, and I wholly support that idea. Experience is the greatest teacher, surely the most reliable teacher. So the issue now is that question of moral ecology, to face as peoples and individuals the truth, not accept lies. The issue is to keep lifting the poor, breaking the chains of poverty in region after region of the world. The issue is to use the means of institutions of liberty. They're only means. The end is to live worthy of them, worthy of all the blood and all the suffering that millions endured to fashion these institutions. And that means to find a worthy form of moral ecology to make all those sacrifices worthwhile. What good would it do to have achieved political liberty and economic liberty and then live like pigs? What a mockery that would make of all those noble people who endured prison and torture and torment and battlefields to bring us where we are. This is the challenge for the coming generation, Act 3. We all wish you strength and courage and imagination as you embrace that task. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, for your keynote speech. Before giving the words to the other participants, I would just have 2 reflections here. On top of what we are talking about here is that when you go around the world, the word democracy certainly has many faces. I mean, almost all countries nowadays are democratic, which of course is not true. Even Turkmenistan is democratic. So when you use the word democracy, it should be used very carefully. And point 2, we should also define what does democracy mean. I spent some time in Egypt also during the revolution, and obviously if you think that westernized democracy is what the Egyptians should achieve, then of course Egyptian is losing very tough. But Egypt would not for maybe 1, 2, 3 generations have democracy if they want that kind of democracy as we have in the future. So please use this word. And the second reflection is being in as a journalist and editor since I was 15 years old, I would say also two things which are very important when you discuss this subject is freedom of expression. I mean, clearly it has been proven by the World Bank and other great institutions that if you want financial, economic progress, then you must also have freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of the politicians, freedom of the people, and so forth. These are two pillars that really carry the word, the way against, if you want progress. One more thing before giving the word, I would say that some of us here are more than 30 years old, maybe even 50 years old, and all the conferences I've been attended, I've always been told, even if I've been flying, for 20 hours, please make it short, Mr. Ejbøl, you have 3 minutes, and then you cut everything down. So today, despite what is being said here, we will really claim freedom of the panelists, meaning that we are supposed to have 5 minutes as opening remarks, but I would like you to feel free, especially about your program, if you would really go into details with your program. That goes true, of course, for the other two gentlemen. One gentleman, one woman, lady. So we really, everybody in the room here, we have a deep background about what these great participants can give to this audience. You were the last to come, Jan, so therefore you were the first to begin. I'm sorry. So if I can just give you a few words about you. Jan Švejnar is Director, Center of Global Economic Governance, Columbia University. I was a student of Columbia University in '71, so please bear with me. And again, a great CV for these people. Jan has also been running up in the 2008 Czech presidential election. He's director of the Center of Global Economic Governance and professor of international and policy affairs at Columbia University. Prior to this, he was the director of the International Policy Center at the University of Michigan, where he was also a professor of business, economics, and public policy. He served as economic advisor to President Václav Havel, as well as the founding director of the Economics Institute of the Academy of Sciences in the Czech Republic from 92 to 99. Just to top it, he is also a PhD from Princeton University. I'm not going to pull your leg here, but with all these great economists we have in the world, why are we in trouble? Please.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This is one of those things where you wish your parents were here. Introduction like this, your father would appreciate it and your mother would almost believe it. So thank you very much. I will try to be brief and I'll try to be provocative because I think the goal is to have a discussion. Michael has provided a great introduction background, so there's no need to go over it again. Let me just start by saying, the world has really changed in the sense that communism is out, right? The world was bipolar. Well, frankly, it never was quite completely bipolar. There were the non-aligned countries, and in fact, Yugoslavia, which was offering kind of a third model of workers' self-government, was always there as an alternative. But it really was a bipolar system, and only one system has survived in a way, and it's capitalism with some political, hopefully democratic structure. But that system itself, while not being threatened by a big alternative, has a lot of problems. We're all aware of the fact that we have now much more instability than there used to be. The crises, financial crises, the most recent one has shown that with globalization, contagious is very dangerous. And so the question is really what kind of system, and with many guises, as Michael pointed out, is going likely to be there, and how livable, how desirable it is, right? And so we have varieties. India has, for instance, significant state ownership. China has a gradual introduction of capitalism, much less or much more slowly sort of elements of democracy coming in. And, major leaders are questioning what to do. I had the privilege, as was mentioned, to work with Václav Havel for a while. And when I started in 1994, he did not believe in the market. He just felt that market was not a mechanism that could really deliver the benefits. So he believed in benefits, he believed in just and very good societies, but wasn't sure. And it took us a while, long discussions, and then he became an ardent advocate of it, together with supplementary public policy in areas where markets fail and so on and so forth. So these are big questions. And in a way, that's why we teach economics beyond the first year where you learn the simple model of free market economy. You need to understand much more, obviously. Then there is the issue that with the globalization, there are global public goods, right? So suddenly, there is a need for much more than was necessary before. The institutions that were established when capitalism was still in a much more rudimentary form are hard-pressed to cope very well. The international institutions, from the UN to the Bretton Woods institutions of the World Bank, IMF, and so on. So big adjustments are needed. And what we are seeing, as was already mentioned, is major changes in the distribution of income, wealth, and associate poverty. And the fight on poverty has been successful in a number of countries, India and China being very good examples that Michael mentioned. There is a big argument. Amartya Sen, for instance, is arguing that China has been much more successful than India, and that in a way that has implications for which kind of system and what kind of policies in particular to pursue. Right? There is a question that relates to the peacefulness of the transition to democracy in countries like China. To me, it's remarkable that if you talk to fellow economists in the profession, they're much more sanguine about the transition in China or continuation than are, on average, political scientists, who are worried that there could be cataclysmic aspects to that transition. So I think that that is really a big issue. I'd like to just spend a minute on Michael's moral question, which I think is very important, moral liberty, and in some sense the question at the very end of, what if we achieve economic and political liberty, but yet live like pigs? So in a way, don't have, in a way, the higher principles coded into the system, etc. And I think there is, I wouldn't say danger, but I think there is probably need to pay attention to this. I teach, as was mentioned, young future leaders, both in business and in public policy. And the world is so fast, so dynamic, so competitive, that these aspects, ethical aspects, moral aspects, often get a very short shrift. Young people understand that they are important, but at the same time, very often they don't have the time, wherewithal. And in fact, we're intentionally beefing up, increasing the amount of curriculum that's in the area of ethics and so on, so as to prepare the future leaders to be much more responsible in this. And I think there is, I'll end on the question of what kind of capitalism in one particular aspect, and that's corruption. If you look at a map, let's say, of Transparency International on corruption around the world, you see in a way that the countries that are seen as having less corruption are the ones belonging to the advanced countries, mostly of Western civilization, not exclusively, and those that have much more corruption and therefore imperfect, in some sense, democratic capitalism, are in the rest of the world. And I think with sort of the world growing, where many of these countries that don't have the less corrupt, if you want, variety, growing fast, I think the big question is, will they start adopting the democratic capitalism with an emphasis on fighting corruption, Or will, in fact, corruption as a greasing of the wheels be the norm that will be perpetuated even as they reach higher levels of living standards? So I think that's a big question. And, in fact, the experience from the countries in this region, as well as elsewhere, is, I think, my conclusion is that it's one where democratic capitalism is not like a weed that grows by itself spontaneously and just takes over everything that's in its way, that it is significantly more like a tropical, fragile plant that will grow, but really needs a lot of attention and a lot of conscious effort, concerted effort, in order to succeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Jørgen. And next to my left is, maybe you should pronounce your name first, to make sure that we pronounce it correctly, your name. Liu Chao-shiuan. Good, thank you. And this fine gentleman is senior advisor to the president and former prime minister himself from Taiwan. Taiwanese politician and university professor, Dr. Liu is currently the chairman of the General Association of Chinese Culture and senior advisor to the President of the Republic of China. He served in the Taiwanese government as Prime Minister 2008-9, Vice Prime Minister 1997-2000, and Minister of Transportation and Communication from 1993 to 96. At the National Tsinghua University, he was a professor, department chair, dean, and president. Later, he went on to serve as the president of the Chao-shiuan University, and also Mr. Liu received a MS in chemistry from the University of Ejbøl, Canada, and finally PhD in chemistry from the University of Toronto. Please. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, when I talk about the economy and the democratic capitalism in front of a great economist, like the two sitting to my right hand, that would make me feel a little uncomfortable, because I myself was a student of chemistry to start with, who always try to find the pleasure and feel happy about getting 70 to 80% of a yield in whatever experimental he does. But for some strange reason, I became a Prime Minister of a state, and that's where I got some of the experience I'd like to share with you, very limited. Talking about the democratic system, capitalism, is this still a model to follow? I would use Taiwan's growth as my first observation. Taiwan did follow this path, especially the American model, since very early, since the 1950s and the 60s, but not quite all the way. The government influence is seen in almost all sectors. And of course, we always hear a lot of complaints from all different sectors. Once, when Margaret Thatcher visited Taipei, and she asked me, she was a chemist as well, you know. She asked me, "What's the job in your office that you spend most of your time to do?" And I gave a thought a little bit, and I answered, "It's the management of complaint." Because we've always been asked to apply more open policies in economies all the time. But in times of difficulties, government intervene become more obvious and vigorous. Like at the time of 2009, when the we had a financial tsunami, so to speak. I remember we were facing, like every other government in the world, the dilemma that if we should lend the rescue to our financial institutes. Finally, we did. We were the first country in Asia to announce the policy that all domestic deposits in Taiwan be guaranteed by the government. And 3 days later, Hong Kong followed. And then Singapore, and then Malaysia, and then all Asian, that part of the world was stabilized. So sometimes you see, even in a free economic system, the government intervening is inevitable. And I even find the earlier the better. Yeah. And the third thing I like to talk about is we follow the democratic capitalism system, but quite wisely, I would say that. Because we always couple our development with a national talent program. The talent, the manpower, because it's the only resource we have in Taiwan. We don't produce any oil, like your country does. We don't produce any minerals, not one molecule of it. But we produce good manpower. I can give you some aspects. Like during the time of the 60s to 80s, we had labor-intensive industries growing in Taiwan. At the same time, we had a 9-year compulsive education system completed at that time. So that provided the very good, the workforce of a high quality, the large quantity, and very competitive wages. And that was the key of success. And during the 80s to 2000, when we transfer our industry from the labor-intensive ones to the high-tech industry, and we had a surge of the so-called return to Chinese scholars and professionals, and those were the college graduates who did not find the opportunities to make themselves out at the early time, so they all went to the United States, or Canada, or Japan, or European countries for the higher degree academically, and sometimes they stay there and get some working experience. But when the homeland industry provided that kind of opportunities, they all returned. And that combination is, again, another beautiful thing to happen. But during the time of 2000, after 2000 years, in the industry of production technology enter into an era of low interest, low profit margin. And then we had this problem, and even right now. So how we, the question is how we best utilize the ICT age in Taiwan to help transfer that to the higher value-added service industry. And we haven't really done successfully yet. But to couple with that strategy, we had the higher education reform program, which consists of about 150 colleges and universities. And now if you walk in the street of Taipei, you can hardly find any young man who's not a college graduate. Of course, the quantity increased sharply and the quality would go down. And some of those students, they the college students, they never fail and never fade away either. So they just did not qualify at all. But for the sort of economic goal and the industrial program ongoing, I think these people ought to be. These people probably don't work as hard as their fathers did, but they really, with a higher creativity mindset, they're very creative in making those, to show the soft power of the nation. Another thing I want to share with you is from the 1950 to 1980, or even the 1990, the average growth in GDP in Taiwan is about 8% over 40 years. And it comes for, if we come to count the income of the highest 20% versus the lowest 20%, the ratios has been kept at 4 for these 30 to 40 years. And it is the post-2000 period where our GDP growth slowed down to 2 to 5%. And the ratio rich versus poor exceeds 6. Yeah, this is something I think very, very interesting and worthwhile studying. The GDP does not, of course everybody knows, does not well present how wealth is distributed. But when economic and financial crisis came, the government always tended to rescue the rich group first. As you hear, some of them are too big to let fall. But when crisis is over, the rich return to the dominating positions in income and in growth. As this is actually guaranteed by the rules of free enterprise and the free market. But the poor remain poor. So the rich to poor ratio get worse. And that's why when we had enjoy the great time period of the time for growth, that figure, the ratio kept constant at 4, which is very good. But when the growth went down, and that ratio got worse. The democratic capitalism used to stimulate growth and bring about prosperity to an unprecedented state of human history in the last century. But it also brought up to the problems we have now, like depletion of natural resource, depletion of even the social justice, global warming, and all these sort of problems. At a time when no other model possesses a successful record nearly as good, I think for many developing states, this model remains a model to follow. But not all the way. We have to be very careful. If we look at what is happening in East Asia, the careful thoughts of the domestic strength, the domestic limit, the international opportunities, as well, international risks. When you you put all these things into consideration, you will find that countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, this part of the world. They together account for 70% of the foreign resource, the reserve, and approximately 40% of the world population. And all of them inherited, at least partly, the same cultural tradition. And each take into their consideration the domestic conditions, constraints, traditional, professional ethics. And it seems on average, they've been doing reasonably well. So these are the observations I'd like to share with you. Thank you.
And then we had the lady in the end. I must say that she asked to be the last speaker, so we don't get any problems here. And Khadija Ismayilova is a journalist. She's from my own trade here, from Azerbaijan. And she's a journalist, radio host, investigative reporter with organized crime and corruption reporting project. She's a host of the daily current affairs show on Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in Azerbaijan. Also an investigative journalist. She uncovered several high-profile corruption cases. If you go to the internet, you can see some of these cases. I can recommend that. Since 1997, she has reported for Azerbaijani, Russian, and English newspapers of the region and has held management positions in Azerbaijani newspapers and RFEIL. In 2012, she was awarded the GERD Free Press of Eastern Europe Award and the Courage of Journalism Award by US-based International Women's Media Foundation.
Thank you. I have a difficult task here to speak about democratic capitalism while I come from the country which is neither democracy nor capitalism. And it claims being both. That's a problem. So I come from Azerbaijan. It's an oil-rich country, and between Russia and Iran, which it uses its oil and energy resources to gain some position in the international geopolitical scene. But I want to speak about how we failed to become a democracy and how we failed to become a market economy in Azerbaijan. So those of you who lived in the Soviet Union long enough might remember the Petiletka plans, the 5-year plans, and the propaganda people who would go from village to village and explain people the goals of the Petiletka, the 5-year. And one of those became a hero for a joke in Azerbaijan, probably in the whole Soviet area. The guy was going from village to village and every 5 years and explaining that we are close to communism. You know, we are with 1 foot here and with another foot in communism. We are as close as this. And he does it every 5 years, and once the one elder citizen, resident of the village, asks him, "Son, can I ask you a question?" And he says, "For how long we are going to stay in this uncomfortable position with our legs apart?" And that was the situation in Soviet Union, and but people were kind of shown the goal where the country is heading to. It was utopia, it was not possible, but people had some incentive or some, they knew where they are going. And what happened then? You probably, if you are the former Soviet Union resident, you also probably remember the horror stories about capitalism that you could read in Soviet newspapers and watch on TV. So this is what happened in Azerbaijan. The whole horror story, all of these horror stories turned out to be true in our market economy transition experience. Well, the problem is Azerbaijan is not, in fact, market economy. The vast majority of GDP is oil, and oil is under state monopoly. The rest of the economy is monopolized by several holdings, and all of them happen to belong to either ministers or president's family members. So this is a corruption, and they mostly benefit from the oil-fed budget. It's most of their contracts are with the state, and coming from the state, and it's another way of stealing the budget money. So basically, we don't see any officially any economy that is beyond the state and those who are governing the state. So as it was portrayed in one of the, I guess it was Foreign Policy magazine, it was what happened in Azerbaijan. It was a successful transition from competitive authoritarianism to personalist breed of hegemonic rule. And well, there is a new term we are using for these kind of regimes, which we call democratorships. It's dictatorships pretending being democracies. So what they do, they become members of the European clubs, like Azerbaijan is a member of the Council of Europe. It has its vote in every platform of Council of Europe. It continues shaking, our president is shaking hands with all European leaders and the leaders of Western democracies, claiming that the same kind of system exists in the country. Well, they say it's a democracy. We're young democracy, and we're trying to grow up slowly, and slowly we become. But I'm not sure the direction is the right, and I'm not sure the direction is the one that's supposed to be. The country is facing choices. Like in the news, you can see a lot of in the media, you can see a lot of stories about whether Azerbaijan will be pro-Western or pro-Russian, whether Russian influence will prevail over the Western influence, and so on. And when we see in fact, what kind of choices the government does, we don't see any smart geostrategic choices there. For example, Azerbaijan refuses, plays with European Union and Russia regarding joining the customs union. So Armenia made its choice. It went to pro-Russian customs union. So everyone is looking at Azerbaijan. It's like, what will be choice of Azerbaijan? And none of them, because integrating your custom systems means that your oligarchs who are controlling the custom and benefiting from the monopolization of economy will not be able to earn any more money. So they just do not integrate any of them. And it's not geopolitical choice. It's just choice to keep the money coming to their own pocket. It's not the choice for the people of Azerbaijan. It's a choice for oligarchs of Azerbaijan. It's a choice for the ministers. So when we look at all these debates on geopolitics and what will be the choice of the country, what the rational basis of that choice, we have to keep in mind that there is also something that is maybe rational, but it's not rational in a in the way you've been thinking. It's very rational. It's within the interest of the people who hold the power in the country, but it's not in the people's interests. So when you look for a rational basis behind the choices of the country, then we have to keep in mind the corruption and what the corrupt regime would also want for the future of the country. So that's why I feel so uncomfortable when you speak about democratic capitalism and its failures in some cases. Well, we would like to have one first, and then try not to fail.
And then try to fail.
So I've been investigating the businesses of the president and his family members. I'm not following them. I'm not looking specifically for their businesses. It's just whatever big business you dig for, the family members of the president pop out from the ownership documents. So I found offshore businesses in Panama. There were some offshore businesses in the BVI. There were some companies that everyone thought they are British, everyone thought they are German, and they turned out to be incorporated by offshore companies that belong to president's family members. And when I discovered the businesses and tried to find out what these businesses are for and why they've been incorporated, and whether they are doing a good business and opening a lot of jobs and providing different opportunities for the people. So I see that the businesses are not actually ran properly. These businesses are not governed well, so they don't earn as much money they could earn from that business. So the philosophy that I guess is behind is not to earn as much money as possible. The philosophy is not to let others in the country to earn money. So to build a weak citizenship. If there are economically independent citizens in the country, they will tend to ask questions, buy advertisement in newspapers, and newspapers can become independent, donate in political process and political parties, form NGOs, and so. This all is not appreciated. All this is not appreciated. The government proved from year to year, they proved that their goal is to restrict the citizenship, to restrict the individual initiative. So all I can speak about is the country with weak citizens and strong government members. But this is not the way for stability. This is not the recipe of stability, because it's a very fragile stability that we have there, and it can be shaken at any time, as we saw in the example of different Arab countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the panelists after hearing these presentations?
I think I agreed with all the panelists. They're very sharp observations made, and I think they justify, from many points of view, the basic human outline. After all, Adam Smith was seeking the system of natural liberty, and we have, I think, transitions. What are they? There are three North Stars, I think, to guide us. One is, are more and more people moving out of poverty? That's one thing we all want to see. It does not have to be human, though it's been common in human history for so many people to be poor. We have minds. We have ways of creating new wealth. So that it is not necessary for anybody to be in poverty. It's more and more a matter of delivering it. Secondly, are more and more people becoming citizens and taking up personal responsibility for the needs of society. The state cannot do everything. And if you overload the state, you choke liberty and you choke initiative. But if everybody in society forming their own associations and their own civic groups, like Forum 2000, if everybody in society is participating in acts to improve the whole society moves forward. I mean, in Poland, I met a group that, after 1989, began, in one case, to dig a well, and a deep well that everybody could share. But until they all mobilized together and started working everywhere they could to get that done, including going to the government to get it done, nothing had happened for generations. It's a small thing, but it's... And then third, are more and more people happy about their personal achievements? What makes us happy is achievement. Having a dream, moving closer, doing the best we can, and often enough achieving it. That's what fills people with satisfaction. There's a great deal of empirical theory about this. And if these three North Stars are working, we're making the transition. In different societies, I want to repeat myself, humans have different customs, different traditions, different virtues. And it's quite natural that the system of politics they choose and the system of economics they choose grows out of that. This is one of Tocqueville's great points in writing about democracy in America. He's writing it for the French, and he's pointing out the French will do it differently, and in keeping with the genius of France. And in that way, we learned from, I think, one of the great achievements of Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty is broadcasting these success stories and failure stories from one nation to another so that we learn. Well, anyway, I take those as lodestones, and I think we're...
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah.
Jan, please.
Yeah, no, I also agree. I think these were very nice illustrations of the problem. I think we have an agreement in these are the broad outlines, and I would stress that, yes, indeed, if we can make a dent or additional dent in reducing poverty, I think that's universally accepted as a good that we want to strive for, and yeah, I think that the increase in citizens' responsibility has been a phenomenon that we see, and we see it in through various organizations, both in the countries that have succeeded as well as in the countries that have not succeeded, right? And it's the extreme absence of democratic capitalism where even these phenomena are suppressed. Those are really the countries to focus on and worry about. So I would sort of stay within that and just stress again the fact that it does take effort, that complacency is not the way to go, that we can't sleep on our laurels even in the advanced countries where things seemingly look good. And I would point out that I think that Europe actually has a little bit of that problem, that a lot of citizens kind of feel things are not too bad, let's not worry about it, and that can be quite dangerous. I think that actually, even in rich Europe, I think the problems are major and actually need to be dealt with.
As an economist in your union, have the bankers, the politicians, the economists learned anything from this crisis? I mean, the crisis is still on, but it is start of leveling off. What would be the maybe 2 or 3 major lessons?
I think we are learning a lot. I would say before going into the details, my problem that I see is a lack of leadership at the level of really the major politicians and policymakers in the world today. I think we're facing problems which are quite serious. We're learning that, the problem of contagion, that, we've avoided a major depression of the 1930s, but just barely. We really were at the abyss and possibly heading further down. We are going through the most trying period since that time in terms of recession, in terms of unemployment in many countries, underemployment in other countries, and so on. And I think that the leadership is not strong enough, in fact, to stress the principles and then find coordinated action. So it's the lack of coordination. We saw it at the beginning of the crisis when United States and Europe, which alone account for half of the world economy, were not able to coordinate. And we see it nowadays, again, coming back to Europe, which recognizes that cannot stay economically in the situation and configuration in which it is, but doesn't have the wherewithal to go forward or, in fact, to go back, either direction being preferable to the one in which it is right now.
Being close to China, could you please reflect, within the last few months we have heard, China economy is getting to a halt, or maybe it's even going down or whatever. And from your position, how would you regard China economically and politically at this specific stage, and for the next 2 or 3 years going ahead, also with the new president and so forth?
My observation is that there's a number of reasons for that phenomenon. First of all, of course, the government is, since the Mr. Xi Jinping took office, he launched a program of anti-corruption sort of things, and that could be one of the reasons to hurt the so-called domestic expense. But their export is, I think, still there. May not be as strong as previously, but I think there will be a difficult period of time. They may be able to recover a little bit, but basically I think they have to change or to fine-tune their systems, to open it up more. As a scientist, I've always been fascinated by the comparison between economic study and things like thermodynamics. Because thermodynamics measures the stability of the system. And the measure is how far it's away from the equilibrium point. So the most sustainable system is the system that's at the nearby positions of your equilibrium. If you compare the economic system of United States and what's happening in China, you find it very opposite observations. There are 2 factors that are affecting the measure of equilibrium. One is the internal energy. That means the accumulation of your internal energy in all aspects. It's a very complicated term. Another is the entropy. Entropy can be, in a social language, this is the measure of the diversity. It's a diversity. So in the case of the U.S., I think they have a big drain of the internal energy. but even at that time, they're still trying to make wars outside of the country. I think that's a very stupid thing to do. They have to accumulate the internal energy a little bit. On the other hand, U.S. government is applying, adopting a very, very free and even more free and more open policy in economy and the finance. And these two put together will make the measure of the equilibrium point shift to very away from the point negatively. But in the case of China, they have accumulated so much in internal energy, but it never increased the diversity of the system. And this is another danger, that it will move the system away from equilibrium point in a positive way. I think all these systems need to be fine-tuned.
Just one short question for you also. I mean, being European, as most of us here are, we are being told that Europe is going down the drain. I certainly disagree. If we are going down the drain, it's a very luxurious going down the drain. But from your point of view, how do you perceive Europe? And you too, please, how do you perceive Europe? I mean, when the Americans talk about Europe and so forth, how do you perceive the situation in Europe?
I actually have more confidence in the perspective, the future of Europe, the European economy. Because the European countries never make war. This is a big consumption of the national strength, unless you can make money out of that. So I think the U.S. policy has to put these factors into consideration.
Please.
Well, there is a different perception of Europe between the people who work closely with European institutions and the ordinary people in the country. The Europe failed to stand in the position of the union of values because those values have been betrayed so much by European politicians in the past several years, including in their assessment of the situation in my country. So Azerbaijanis see a lot of European politicians who come and there is even a term for that, caviar diplomacy, that the government of Azerbaijan is using of the oil money to buy out European politicians and have them close their eyes to human rights violations in the country. So, and also Azerbaijani corruption money have the major destination for Azerbaijani corrupt money is Europe as well. So for people of Azerbaijan, the Europe is the European companies come and get Azerbaijani oil. The corrupt money are flowing to Europe. Corrupt politicians come from Europe. So it's kind of not a good story. So I think when we are speaking about showing an example and telling the success stories, it's very difficult to do lately when Europe fails its own values in this case. So it's very difficult to portray like success story of the Europe as a union of values.
One question I would like to pose you to Michael before we opening up for question is, you know, that Jan was also just slightly discussing this, you know, that everything is going faster and faster and faster. And nowadays, you know, we only send small messages and so forth. For me, being a newsman, for me, it's unbelievable, you know. Everybody, when you talk to everybody, even babies, everybody is so busy. They don't read newspapers, they don't read books, they don't watch movies. What the hell are you doing? And at the same time, we are discussing question about morals and so forth. But speed is of essence. But why is that so, Michael, please? And is it so? And what is the end result of running and running and running with small tidbits of information and so forth? please.
Well, for me, the implication is, in order to do my daily life, I have to call on younger people who understand the technology, because I don't understand it. I necessarily use email. I necessarily use an iPhone. But when I come to Prague, I have to be careful of costs and batteries, and it's all on a different system. And Lucia knows she has to do everything of this sort for me. And my grandchildren, they have to show me how to set up the television and the DVDs. And it just goes very, very fast. And that's why, in a way, we depend on the younger generation. But at the same time, it's going fast for them, too. If I may change the subject just a moment.
Yes, please.
Two really big things that are happening that we fail to notice. First of all, medicine is becoming so successful and so almost miraculous that people are living longer and longer and longer. That wasn't in the calculation when we planned Social Security. And in addition, people are having fewer and fewer babies, women everywhere. Now, those, when they are pregnant, those are born healthy far more frequently. They live. It wasn't so long ago, a huge percentage of infants born died in 2 years. In Bangladesh, for example, Western writers talk about a population explosion, which went from World War II until a decade ago, from about 30-something million to 100 million. But if you're Bangladeshi, that's not a tragedy. It means your cousins and sisters and brothers are living. It's a great thing. But in most of the world, couples are having fewer and fewer children. Well, the pressure this is putting on our Social Security system and our medical systems is enormous, because they were contrived on the idea that there would be 7 or 8 new workers to pay their old age assistance. Now it's down to 2, thereabouts. I think many of our welfare programs are simply unsustainable, and it's going to be a major crisis for all the democracies. The promises made will not be able to be fulfilled. And it's going to put great pressure on our ethical systems and how we think about life and how we think about everything. So an old Jesuit friend of mine used to say, Michael, everything good, given enough time, goes badly. And it's, life teaches you. There's some truth in that.
Nice with optimism. Jan, please.
I was just going to add to it. I think that there are 2 ways to look at the rapid technological change, especially communications technology, IT. One is that it's always been that way in some sense. The older generations got out of date and the younger generations were the ones espousing the new technology. I think the difference is that the rate of change and the invention and innovations are so rapid that the world is really changing dramatically. It's a discontinuous shift in some sense, okay? And it's harder to cope with it. And the time element is important, as was pointed out, that the young professionals, who are now, by the way, very similar all around the world. If you get young professionals in Beijing, Istanbul, Paris, London, New York, wherever, Prague, they have a lot together. They're no longer these huge differences they used to be, but they're fast. They're moving quickly. The time is of essence. Decisions made quickly can make all the difference. And indeed, in some sense, they are by necessity more superficial. And the question is whether then the principles that we're talking about here, the depth and philosophical aspects, don't go by the wayside. And so I think that's really one of the big challenges that have to be here, including the fact, those of you who know the Daily Show of Jon Stewart in the United States and Colbert, very often the young professionals, that's where they get their news. So I watch it so that I know what my students are thinking and how they are viewing the world.
Good excuse.
Thank you. So any questions? Or any verbal attacks?
There's a question.
The lights are bright, yeah.
Yeah, then we will probably... Oh, there was a microphone coming here, yes?
you. My name is Thomas Manchal. I'm from Charles University. I want to question this almost assumption about lifting people from the poverty. To me, both Michael Novak and, most of you actually, or some of you said that we are now lifting people from poverty. I want to question this assumption. Is there any hard data, or what are these data where we can say, for example, that China is lifting people out of poverty? I've heard many almost horror stories about the conditions of working people in China. Are these conditions also taken into account in such studies? And one more thing, the comment on thermodynamics. I think we should not forget, when we are using thermodynamical assumptions, that life and economics, that is everything that is living, is steady state but highly out of equilibrium. All right.
Thank you.
I need some translation.
Well, it can be
quite hear.
It was basically about poverty, the statistics about poverty. Maybe, Jan, you can...
Yeah, no, I can speak out to the data. So the poverty that we talk about is really abject poverty, okay? It's something that, we can't imagine unless you go there and see it. So the measures are, how many people live on $1 a day or equivalent, however calculated, it's very little, or $2 a day, something like that. So by that measure, yes, the rates of growth, which have been phenomenal for a long period of time, have lifted millions, tens of millions, 100 in China nowadays, from below to above, okay? It's very different from the poverty measures that we have, in Europe or the United States, et cetera, where you're really measuring kind of a lower middle class living standard, but you're below that as well. So yes, you're right that in terms of conditions, pollution, and so on, things can get worse in the process of rapid economic growth as it did in China. But in terms of simply lifting people from starvation to just above starvation, yeah, there has been a lot of progress.
And the most important thing in that is lifting people to a position of taking opportunities to develop their talents. You never know which sorts of families, how poor, contain within them seeds of genius and seeds of beauty and other things. And so it's not just giving people enough to not starve, but to put them on the ladder whereby they can explore their own talents and see where they will go. That's one of the great gifts of a well-constructed economy. Not just lifting you out of want and necessity, but freeing up a world in which there are many, many occupations and many, many directions you can go. And this brings out more and more talent from the people.
I think there was a question. Yes.
I came from Burma. I'm a member of parliament. And I haven't heard about any comment from your panels about our country's transitional process.
From what? Sorry?
I want to hear about any comments or description about our country's transitional process.
Well, there's
2 years of transition.
Which country?
There's an echo in the hall that makes it. Can you? We're close to getting what you want, I think, but not quite.
Sorry. My country is in a process of transition for 2 years, and I haven't heard about your comment on the process.
On the process of
transition. Process of transition. Your academic comments, academic descriptions.
Well, you have sprung from your bosom one of the great leaders of the world. I mean, last night was a magnificent display of commitment to courage and truth and wisdom, and I may say personal sweetness instead of bitterness. So something is happening. Now, in another group in which I took part today, the argument went that to change a political system can be very quick. To change even in a year or two, as we saw in this whole region, To change a economic system may take much longer because habits have to change. But to change a moral system and a system in which people breathe more freely and yet take more responsibility can take 60 years. And in fact, I don't know how many parts of the world remember the story of Adam and Eve as they were moved out of the paradise. Adam turns to Eve and says, "Eve, don't worry. This is just an age of transition." So there's just always these transitions. They're faster now and deeper. But.
Thank you.
Okay. I would just, if I may add, that it's a process in hindsight, judging from the countries that have gone through it, let's say here, former Soviet bloc generally, that is much less uniform, much less assured, and takes many, many forms from the failure that was discussed to relative success, sometimes 5-10 years that look very good, followed by a very rapid sort of decline into an unsuccessful state, Hungary being a good example of that. So I think one lesson that Burma can take from that is that don't fall asleep. This is really something that you have to steer very carefully and always be cautious about what you're doing.
Thank you. We have 1 minute left, if needed. If not,
There is one. There.
there's one, yeah. A 1 minute question, including answer. Yes, please.
I just wonder, we heard a contrast concerning democracies and Azerbaijan's situation where it seems maybe there was a bit of a lamination that came into the country, capitalism, democracy of some form or other, but never took. And things continue. Is there what is the European and the U.S. and the Asian moral response to that? Because it seems to me like in what I won't try
Khadija.
your name. In what you were sharing, there's a bit of an appeal, too. There's a lot of money moving around that connects all of us together somehow, and somehow we're enabling something to continue. Is there a response to this situation?
Well, I want just to make a reservation. What I told is in no way I was speaking against democracy and capitalism. It's not. It is possible if the goal is to build one. If the goal is to build a democratic society, then it's possible probably to do. But without democracy and without rule of law, the independent judiciary, there is no way that the country can succeed in that way. And that is what happened in Azerbaijan. There is no independent judiciary, and there is no aspiration from the government to enhance democracy in the country, to build a democratic society. Right the opposite. So that's a problem. And if the Europe thinks that Azerbaijan is too far, and if the America thinks that Azerbaijan is too far from them, and it's okay that these bad things are happening there, well, I have to say that it's not true. Well, one of the most latest scandals is the example of Azerbaijan bribing Eurovision judges for getting more. So this is just a song contest, right? But that's how Azerbaijan brings its corrupt practices to Europe. That is how Azerbaijan bribes European politicians in European parliaments, parliamentary structures. Azerbaijan bribes the governments for closing eyes to the human rights problems. So our corrupt practices are coming to the heart of the Europe, and it's not far away. It is coming and spoiling your societies. Our corrupt officials are coming to your countries with their dirty money. We did an investigation on Azerbaijani oligarchs' investments in Czech Republic, and they have so much property here, and nobody asks them where the money come from. Nobody. And nobody does ask it in Switzerland, nobody asks it in Germany, nobody asks in the United Kingdom. And then what happens? In the village of Chovdar in the west of Azerbaijan, the gold mining is taking place. We go to the village and we ask people what do they think about it, and they say it's a catastrophe for them because miners came and took their land, took their water, and they hate these miners, whom they think are being English people. Like they call it Inglis. They think it's a British company that does mining there. Well, it's not a British company. That company belongs to President's daughter. But it's British whom people blame in Azerbaijan for all the suffering they have. It's national resources given to President's daughters by President's order. It's for basically nothing. It's for nothing. And they got state contracts for that as well. So Europeans are to blame for that. And when Europe will face a situation like in Iran in 1979, it shouldn't come as a surprise. So that's how Europe is being portrayed to Azerbaijan. This is the face of Europe we know.
Thank you. And please thank my great colleagues here for great, and also we would like to say thank you for attending. Thank you.